One. He runs one of the top business podcasts in the world that he has been hosting for around a decade. He has over 2,000 interviews and is one of the few that has turned his podcast into a very profitable business. Before his podcasting days, he founded Bradford and Reed, a company that ran a collection of startups. He built Bradford and Reed into a $30 million company in his 20s to the point where they were processing 400,000 online greeting cards a day. And they were a top 25 valued website property in the world way back in the year 2000. He got to the point where he was burnout and sold his company, and then he decided to become a podcaster. The name of his podcast is Mixergy and is close to being one of the biggest business podcasts on the planet. Our guest's name is Andrew Warner. He has interviewed top entrepreneurs from all over the world, such as the founders of Wikipedia, Groupon, Living Social, LinkedIn, Airbnb, and many, many, many more. Today, his podcast is a household name throughout the entrepreneur scene, and he is on our show to tell us how he did it all. Andrew, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Chris.
Good. And how long have you been podcasting? Because I couldn't get the exact date that Mixergy started. Do you remember when it was?
2007, I think, was the first one.
Okay, so you're at 14 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're almost like the first podcast on the internet that that long ago. Close to it.
Before podcasting was on the iPhone, when you needed all kinds of special software to get it, Lemon was the app. Anyway, it's been
Yeah.
a while.
What made you think even way back then? Did you think that podcasting would be a successful platform, or were you just excited about doing interviews and decided to hop into it?
Both. I really like having conversations with people who I'm curious about. And at the same time, I'm somebody who, as a listener, I just like having something on in the background all the time. Like if we get into a home and there's nothing up on the walls, it bothers my wife. She needs to put art on the walls. She needs to make it into a home by having bookcases full with this and that. I'm not as interested in that, but I do need some kind of audio all the time. It
Mm.
just is, it fills a room, and it doesn't have to be music. It could be talk. So if I'm driving, I'll listen to something. If I'm walking around the house, if I'm running, I'll listen to something. And so I feel like if you're going to listen, it should be something that matters, something that's specific to what you're thinking about and caring about. And that's the beauty of podcasting, that there's a topic there. There's a person who's obsessing on that topic for everybody.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that because you see a lot of people that try a new platform and try a new platform and try a new platform, and then they don't ever seem to hit it. And then you see a handful of people that started on a new platform, social media platform or podcasting platform in the early days, and they just explode and kind of just ride the momentum of that. Do you think there's a secret to choosing the right platform for you? Not you specifically, but for each individual person in the early days? Because, like, I don't know, about a year ago, Clubhouse just kind of started to get popular and build momentum. And now, I mean, I haven't been on Clubhouse since probably March. And I know a lot of people who haven't also, but what are your thoughts on it?
I used to dismiss those platforms because they came and they failed, and haha to all the people who tried it and it didn't work. You wasted your time. That's a mistake, though. I realized that people who got good at Clubhouse were good at Twitter Spaces and then will be good at whatever the next thing is. It's just all experimentation. And the people who got on these platforms early, even if we all dumped out, they got some attention for themselves because they were in those platforms. So if you're feeling called to it, if you're interested, I think it makes sense to be in it. I think the big problem is not picking a platform. I think the big problem is overthinking the platform. And by that, I mean, when it comes to podcasting, how many people spend forever finding the right microphone and making sure that they have studio space and making sure that this and that, and then they have to bank 20 before they put out their first one. And it's like, all this nonsense. And in reality, they're just way overthinking it. They're better off coming up with the trailer, quickly publishing it, doing the first one, and then committing to doing it on a regular basis, and also being comfortable dropping out if it doesn't work. And I think
Yeah.
that works much better than overthinking.
Yeah. So you've got a new book. Stop Asking Questions, which is an ironic name for a podcaster who asks questions for a profession. And but if you guys want to find out why he titled the book, you should buy it and read it because he tells you why exactly. No, just kidding.
Okay, tell him anyway.
Uh, so I actually, when I got this book and I finished this in probably a week and a half, I looked at the table of contents and I thought to myself, that's a lot of content for 160 pages or so. And but I think you hit it kind of spot on. Like you run through it, it is direct, it is clear. And for anybody that has a podcast or thinking about starting a podcast, I think this is a good way to kind of start off doing that. I want to hear some of your backstory and get into that, Andrew. But one of the stories that stood out for me that you wrote in the book is really one that I thought was bold and really cool because when you were an unpaid intern at Bear Stearns, you got the courage up to ask Alan Greenspan for a one-on-one meeting. And for those that don't know, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan.
No, no, he was a different person. He actually was known as Ace Greenspan, and he was this was a person who was just in finance, not the guy who
Oh,
ended up.
okay, okay. I
Yeah,
got him confused. All right.
yeah.
So, but anyway, he was one of the top guys at Bear Stearns, right? And you got the courage to
The top guy.
the top guy. Okay. Tell us why you had the courage to do that at a young age, and maybe a bit about that story.
I do not like just watching life from a distance. I like being a part of it. And as somebody who just kept reading about people like Ace, who was running Bear Stearns and just doing huge things in finance, I didn't want to watch them. I wanted to be in their world. And for me, the first step was let me just get to meet him and ask him some questions. By the way, you hearing an echo?
No.
If anyone out there is hearing an echo, let us know. And so I said, I'm working here. I'm not making money. Why don't I just reach out to the boss and see if he'll see me in person? And sure enough, he was willing to do it. I just contacted his assistant. I said, I want to meet the guy. I work for him. Can I learn a little bit more about him? And I got the opportunity, and I freaking blew it because
Yeah.
nothing came out of it. And now that I think about it, I think if you're working for someone, even if they're a major celebrity, they're so much more attainable than you imagine. In fact, even if you're not working for someone, I was just talking to Mark Randolph, the guy who founded Netflix with Reed Hastings. I think he's the actual founder. Reed Hastings was the investor who ended up taking the company on. But fine, he says co-founder. The freaking guy did incredibly well with Netflix. A friend of mine, Matt Morales, just reached out to him years ago off his website, said, I'm starting a company. Will you advise me? The guy has advised him for years
Mm-hmm.
and invested in his company and just will do so much for him just because Matt reached out to him randomly. And so what I'm saying is people are incredibly attainable. The thing is that we often blow it. And if you're on the receiving end of people's requests for help and you say yes, you want to help. And the
Mm-hmm.
worst is when they just waste your freaking time. And I wasted his time. I
Yeah.
got in there. I asked him about things that I read about, and all he did was just confirm it and give me a little bit more information about the things that I already read. And I go, oh, this is not going well. And then finally, the guy stands up. He looks me in the face and he says, thank you for coming here. And I realized, this is his way of kicking me out. And so I say thank you. And then on my way out, he says, well, I see what you're looking for, Andrew. You want a little bit more insight into how to make it in this business. Someone once told me that if you do what you love, you never have to work a day in your life. All right, I hope that helps. And that was it. Freaking A. I
Uh-huh.
got that from a quote book. That's meaningless. And so I wanted to take advantage of those situations when they come up in the future and never blow them. And that's what I've done now. It's not just in the podcast, it's in interviews on other platforms. We talked about Clubhouse, which I was a part of for a while. We talked about other platforms, but also in real life. If I'm getting to meet somebody who I want to learn from, connect with, I don't want to blow that opportunity.
Yeah.
And what I've done in the interviews is take advantage of those opportunities well. And then in the book, I said, here are the techniques that I use to get people to be open, to have deep, meaningful conversations.
Yeah. Was there a time, or maybe you could mention a time when you had a podcast guest on your show that you were really excited to have, like maybe somebody that you thought was like the top entrepreneur or investor in the
Mark
world.
Randolph, I've been freaking amazed by him. I was
Uh-huh.
someone sitting on the sidelines watching Netflix story take off and people make up all these nonsense stories about how it was founded. And I thought, that's not it. I want to really talk to the guy who founded it, not Reed Hastings, the guy who's running it, but the guy who was just running through a bunch of ideas trying to figure out what to do and then hit on the idea of Netflix. And I got to talk to him. The guy is phenomenal. He's
Yeah.
everything I was hoping to meet and more energetic. I think he told me he was 65 or something, still going on these long runs, still going on mountain climbing expeditions, helping entrepreneurs, investing, taking an interest in cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. Everything is phenomenal. And the beauty of doing Mixergy for as long as I have, if you do anything long enough, people eventually notice. Not just long enough, but also loud enough, people will notice. The beauty is that his team reached out to me and said, "Can Mark be on your podcast?" And I said, "Hell yeah." I
Oh
don't even
yeah.
record on Tuesday, but I said, "Hell yeah, I'll find a way."
But tell us about a time like you had a guest, Andrew, and you were really excited about the guest, but then you felt like you were flopping in the middle of the interview, or you felt like it wasn't going the way that you wanted. So, in maybe you recovered yourself or tried to recover from that.
This is one. So,
Uh-huh.
Chris, before the interview, I happen to have a therapy session. And I'm like
Uh-huh.
carving out time. We've got COVID in my house. So I got everybody in the freaking Airbnb now. It's just really tough on me. But I set my kids up with an iPad and a learning app. I stepped outside. I talked to my therapist, and I said to the therapist, I said, "David, I don't even know where I'm going with this interview with Mark Randolph." And then it occurred to me, I have to be centered on a thing that I'm curious about. And for me is how does he figure out what he wants to do with his life? He's done so many interesting things. How does he come up with the things that he's interested in doing?
Mm-hmm.
And so, sorry, I actually am realizing that I got calls coming in somehow. And so that's what I centered on. And I started forcing the conversation towards that, towards Mark. How did you know the Netflix? How did you know what to come up with? How did you know before that the mail order? Like, how did you? And I love that he called it out, that I create an atmosphere where he can be open with me. And he said, "Andrew, you're pushing too much to get the answers in the direction that you want out of this conversation. I don't think that way. I don't work that way. I didn't say the same way that you think I said, I need to come up with a good business idea. I'm going to experiment this way. I need to decide whether my working for my mom is better than working for my." He says, "No." He says, "I love the unknown." He says,
Mm-hmm.
"I enjoy getting lost in the unknown. As soon as it's known, I lose interest." And then we started talking about that and why he loved it and why he doesn't define himself by his failures. Because when you go down an unknown path, you're going to fail a lot. And he talked a lot about failure at Netflix. You know, Netflix was thinking about doing VHS tapes, then they were doing DVD sales, and then DVD sales didn't work, and then they were doing DVD rentals, and then people weren't excited about DVD as a platform. So all those things. I said, "How did you not define yourself?" And he talked about how when he was a kid, he used to sell seeds door to door. And when people rejected him, he realized, well, let me understand why and let me do it again and let me try and see if I could adjust what I say or the first thing I sell or what I wear tomorrow. And he
Mm-hmm.
said that's where he discovered his zone. Anyway, the reason I'm saying all that to you is I create an atmosphere where we can talk about when the interview sucks, when I'm not getting what I'm looking for. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's where the gems come out, from that openness. And in that conversation, we were open about how the conversation was being too structured, and that led to a deep awareness of who he is, someone who enjoys the unstructured.
Do you think you've adapted more of an unstructured style of interview over the years? Because in the
No, I'm
book,
too anal.
you like to be right
I'm
on
very
point.
anal.
Yeah.
Yes. My therapist said, "What's that podcaster who's always so, the guy who's super popular and who's like," I said, "You mean Joe Rogan, right?" And he goes, "Yeah, isn't Joe Rogan unstructured? Why do you need to know what you're going for with this interview?" And I said, "You now know me. I can't just walk into a conversation not knowing what's going on. It's just not me.
Yeah.
I need a goal for everything." And so we had a goal.
So you've mentioned your therapist quite a few times, just on this chat, and I think you talk about you hired some consultants in the book and coaches in the book on being a better speaker and a better podcaster. What role is therapy playing in your life as a podcaster right now? Are you using this? Is this regularly?
Zero bupkis. My wife
Uh-huh.
basically said, "Us moving to Austin is not my idea," she said, "but I'll do it. What I need you to do though is go to therapy so that you can just get more organized mentally," because she sees that I'm now at a place where I'm kind of wandering
Mm.
mentally. And so she said, if we're staying here, get into therapy with somebody. And so I'm going into therapy, and I don't really fully understand what the goal is, but we're coming up with it. It's just been a couple of sessions.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Um, so you back to the timeline of your story. You built Bradford and Reed, and you built that into a $30
Sorry,
million
let
company.
me pause for a second, Chris.
Uh
Though
huh.
I will say this:
Uh huh.
I wish that I'd taken on more coaches in my life. And one example is I had a coach for chess. Chess, you can see a rating, you get a score all the time, like nothing else in the world. You know where you stand.
Right.
When I had a coach, I intentionally scheduled him for 5:30 in the morning, so I was getting up at 5:30 for the call. I intentionally told him what my goal was, right, to
Mm-hmm.
improve and so on. The fact that he and I were every week examining my games, going over mistakes, going over opportunities that I'd missed, going over structures and strategy, meant that my score was increasing by 200 points, which is significant at my level within a few months. And then I wasn't happy that he was showing up late, so I said, I can't work with you anymore, but I got to replace him. I have found coaches, if they're the right ones, to be phenomenally helpful and
Mm-hmm.
pain in the ass to find. But I did do it for the interviews. I found a coach who was the producer of Inside the Actor Studio. I told him
Mm-hmm.
my problem week to week. We analyzed the hell out of each transcript. And then every time we figured out something that worked, I put in a Google Doc. And then I would go back and find in the transcript an example of how it worked. And I would add that to the Google Doc. So the Google Doc had it all. And so what I'm saying is, this book was informed by that. My interview process was informed by that coaching. And I've got to do more of it, more and more coaching.
Do you mind sharing some of the coaches that you use that you like their work?
Uh, I don't always know their names because they've been there and left. Jeremy Carrican, absolutely remember him. He is
Mm-hmm.
the producer of Inside the Actor Studio. The guy he was phenomenal. I just lost touch with him, and I'll send him a note every once in a while. Like when the host of Inside the Actor Studio died, I sent him a note, a condolence. He doesn't respond. He was never super techy, but I wish he would know how much he influenced my interviews. I just don't think he cares. I think he's just in his own world, his own creative experience, which I dig about him.
Fair.
Um, I felt there was a period there where I sucked at sex. I went and I found this. I looked for a bunch of people to help me, and I found this one dude who was a hypnotist in Equinox of all freaking places.
Uh huh.
And we just talked about it. And I'm like, all right, Andrew, here's the thing. You're getting too deep in your head. Here's how you get yourself out of your head and how you can focus. I go, I thought you were just a waste of time, but I was experimenting. This was fantastic. Great conversations. Told me when he sucked at sex, it was like great.
Uh-huh.
Um, so there are random times in my life which have been incredibly helpful to have that outside person both give me guidance and influence, but also make sure that I'm having regular awareness that this is something I'm working on.
Yeah.
Chess, interview, sex. What else you
You
got?
do one coach at a time, or do you, if it's a different area of your life, do you mind hiring two or more coaches at once?
When I'm not sure about the approach I want, like when I sucked at sex and I didn't know what approach was right, I was trying everybody. I had time. Let's go do it. Um, when I am like with chess, I didn't want to have two different teachers each give me a different process.
Uh-huh.
You know, one person telling me to do one opening, another person telling me to do another, and then there's no, I don't know, there's no consistency. In that case, I'll go with one person, one process, or one approach, even if it's multiple teachers who are doing it.
Yeah. I do want to dissect the structure of your podcast as a business, Andrew, because I really feel like so many podcasters they struggle with building with monetizing their podcast, right? They struggle with making it something that that is sustainable for them in the long run. And I don't know if you listened to Tim Ferriss had a new episode where it was about his 700 million downloads. And one of the things that he mentioned was that one of the reasons he continues to podcast is even if it fails, it's still success for him. Like he gets somebody on the show that he still learns from, even if the show's a flop, you know?
Think about
And
what other platform, by the way. I We keep using interviewing as interviewing and podcasting as synonymous. They're not. I
mhm,
think that that's true for interviewing. It's not necessarily true for podcasting. There's some people who are
okay.
podcasting with a mic and nothing else. I don't think they're getting nearly as much. They might be, but I think it's completely different. It's interviewing that's the magic. Whether you do it in text form or you interview somebody and then you go back and you write it out. When you think about someone like Neil Strauss, he is an unbelievable interviewer. When
Mm-hmm.
he goes in and he interviews someone for the New York Times or for his book or for Rolling Stone, right? He will study everything he can about them. And before he even meets them, he's smarter for having done it. And then in the conversation, he could be smarter. Now, he's not doing it as a podcast. He's doing it in book or newspaper or magazine form. That's the magic. There's nothing else like that. If you suck at Instagram, you suck. You're not getting much out of it. Maybe you're learning to be a little creative, but you're not learning from outside influence. There's nothing like interviewing to do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, so actually, let's dissect kind of the structure of Mixergy's as a
Yeah.
business. You have revenue from the advertisements. You have revenue from the master classes, and is there anything else that's pulling in revenue from Mixergy?
There have been over the years. At this point, it's just those two. There have
Okay.
been over the years where I'll do an event. So Tim Ferriss was at one of my events, and I did an interview, and he was incredibly supportive and incredibly open in there
Mm-hmm.
in that session. There are other things that I've offered, but at the heart of it, it's those two: the membership and the advertising.
Okay. And what's the current stats of the show?
I don't know, and
Do you know how many total downloads, plays
I swear
ish?
I don't know. And I'm glad that I don't. So we've
Mm-hmm.
talked in the past, maybe not you and I, but I've talked in the past about how one of the things that got me down in podcasting was I would
Following
pay
those.
attention to my numbers so much
Me too.
that I hated it. And then I was weak at it. I hated, like, I felt like such a failure for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to Seth Godin at the time when everybody said the beauty of blogging versus newspapers is that there are comments and you get interaction from people. And and he had the guts at that time when people said that is the beauty, that is the magic of blogging, to get rid of it. And I asked him, I said, why did you get rid of it? And he said, I can't stop speaking to the audience and adjusting my presentation to the audience. I pay too much attention essentially to the audience, he said. And
Mm-hmm.
he killed the thing that everyone said was most important. And his writing became better. For me, it's the same thing. I judge myself all the time that way. It's like kissing and then in the middle going, am I doing good? Am I doing good? Am I doing good? Am I doing good? You got to at some point stop caring about it in order to do good. And
Yeah.
so I had to stop caring about the numbers in order to do well here. I can't do both.
Yeah, that makes sense. General estimation: 10 million downloads, 100 million
I
downloads.
literally have no. I
No
literally
idea
have
whatsoever.
no idea.
No way, really, nothing. No. Okay, but you are one of the top business podcasts. It is one of the top business podcasts, from what I know, right?
I
Maybe.
don't even get hung up on. I don't even get hung up on that competition because here's
Okay.
why.
Yeah.
I am the type of person who will feel bad for being in second place as soon as I start to care about it. And think about
Really.
it, second
Yeah.
place, right? You just have to know who you are, and you could see that. I think in many ways there was a reason why I was drawn to Wall Street as a kid, as a teenager in college. Why I wanted to go meet Ace, the guy who was running Bear Stearns.
Mm-hmm.
It's because everything is so numbers based. I loved it. I loved it
Mm-hmm.
when I used to go with my boss and his friends. Everybody knew where they were because they had a sense of how much money they made. Now,
Yeah.
not his deep personal friends, but his work friends for sure. I interviewed this guy. His name is Tom Cruise, just like the actor, but spelled differently. He's in the real estate game. He and his friends literally know where they stand in the pecking order based on how much money they make, and they keep a spreadsheet of how much money everyone makes.
Right.
He needs that. I have that pull in me to be that type of person, and I have to watch out for that.
That makes sense. If you
Yeah.
turn into that type of person, does it become obsessive? Like
Yes.
okay, you don't like the
Yes.
person you become when you're
I'm
so
not
competitive
productive.
about.
I'm not getting anywhere great with it. You know, it
Okay,
has to be. I have to know my weaknesses, and that's a big one.
that makes sense. How long and after you started podcasting did you start advertising?
It took me a few years. It was in the beginning, Chris. I was worried that people would see me as being inauthentic if I took advertising. That I authentically wanted to learn, and I didn't want the guest to say he's only doing this, he's only having me on to pump up his numbers so that he can get more ad money. He doesn't really care what I have to say. I'm going to say no. I was worried that would happen. I was worried the audience would say Andrew doesn't really care about us. He only cares about making money from this podcast. He's just creating content to make money. And
Mm-hmm.
I was really worried about that. And I said, that's not my goal here. And so I'm just not going to do it. And I kept saying no. And obviously, if you're doing a podcast for business people, you're going to have business people listening who are going to say, why don't I buy an ad there? Right. And so they would reach out to me and I kept saying no.
Yeah.
And then finally, when I was ready to say yes or yes curious, no one was asking at the time. And I had to go and figure out how do I get somebody to say yes. And that was a bit of a learning process.
I think a lot of people go through that. So it's worth, I think there's some merit in this question, Andrew, that, they're worried about that same thing that you're worried about. Is there ever a time that's too early to start taking advertisements for your pod?
Well, one of the things that moved me to say yes to advertising was I read this article by Jason Fried who talked about drumming. And his main point was that you have to suck at drumming in order to be good at drumming. And then he carried that into business. He said you have to practice making money before it's time, before you could get good at it. It was in Inc. magazine if you want to go find it. My takeaway from that was, you know what? If I need this podcast and business to stand on its own and not have me fund it,
Mm-hmm.
and I want that because that way I know that it's really useful. If it's making money, then I know that people value it enough to make it useful. If I want that, I have to practice. I have to practice early and I have to practice when I suck, just like a drummer who has to suck and not have the rhythm. And so that's when I decided to go out and get an advertiser, not for the money, but for the practice. And the first advertiser was $650 or $750. I just sent it was FreshBooks. I just sent the team at FreshBooks an email
Mm-hmm.
with that first email that I reached out to them on, and I said thank you for buying an ad in my podcast. It was that meaningful, not because 650 or 750. I obviously don't even remember the number, so it wasn't life changing, obviously, but it was not life changing money, life changing experience in that I learned how to do it. I learned when the audience was small that I don't feel comfortable reading the ads by myself, that I suck. And in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, I would then ask my wife, can you talk with me on camera and promote FreshBooks? And she said, okay. And so I couldn't do it on my own as much as I tried to, Chris. I would stare for hours, literally at the camera, recording. Then no, that's not good, and try it again. And today I still don't do it. And
Uh,
I do my interview, and in the interview I read my ad,
yeah.
and I ask permission of every single guest before we get started. But I have to tell them I can't do it on my own. And I've
Wow.
gotten better, but I still can't. And the upside of that, though, of realizing that is, I think it makes for a much more interesting ad if I get to do it with my guests. So Mark Randolph today asked me not to be included in the conversation for my sponsor. He didn't want to have a back and forth.
Yeah.
But sometimes I do have a back and forth, and people who use Gusto will tell me why they use Gusto.
Yeah.
And then that looks more and is more authentic. People who use a competitor of Gusto will tell me why they prefer a competitor of Gusto for paying their people. And that also leads to an understanding of why Gusto is useful. And so that combination makes for the ad copy being not a copy, but being more of a conversation that's at the same level and the same quality, hopefully, as the rest of the interview.
So what you're saying is you're human just like the rest of us?
Worse, I suck at listening to them talking.
Okay, can you give an estimation on podcast revenue from advertising right now, commercials,
I'll just
sponsorships?
give you an estimate.
Yeah.
It's about 500,000, somewhere around there,
Okay.
a year.
And then you have numerous master classes, I think.
And it's all part of a membership. They're both
Yeah.
roughly, and I'm obviously not giving you exact numbers. I don't know, but
Yeah.
in my mind, it's about half and half a million, somewhere around there. Some
Okay.
years a little bit more, some years a little bit less, but that's where it is.
How do you decide on who you want to do a master class with?
It depends. It's like if a guest was really good, then I'd ask them. I say, look, there's clear enthusiasm in the audience. Can you come back and teach the thing that you did well?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll have a book out and I'll ask them to come and teach some content, some ideas from the book. Sometimes it's a combination of that and my need. It's everything. Sometimes if someone in my audience says I'm having a problem with this thing, I go, I know the guy. I know
Yeah.
the guy. I'll go get him. I know other people have the same problem and I'll go get them. Yeah, that's it.
And then how do you decide, or do you have a structure on, do you split revenue or split sales with those?
They
You,
don't want the revenue with it, and
uh,
in some ways I think maybe I made a mistake by picking people who don't want the little bit of revenue that would come from some number of my members watching some fraction of their videos. But they don't want it. There's not enough revenue to go from 300 different 300 different episodes, and then also some people are not even in it for that. They don't watch a single one. I ask them, why are you even a member? They say, I just want to support, right? So it's it's just not there. But I think in retrospect, Chris, that might have been a better model for me to have said,
Mm-hmm.
look, everyone who's on gets a share of the revenue. I'm going to teach the first 100, 200 people how to create a master class and split the revenue with them. I'll even create it with them and then split the revenue that comes from it. But then the next 1,000 people need to do it on their own. And this is a platform. I think if I would have done that, it would have been Skillshare and would have been a bit better business and a better long-term product. That's a mistake. So when you talk about therapy, that's one of the things I'm going to talk to my therapist about. Like, did I screw up there? Should I have done that? And how do I let go of those thoughts?
Are you advertising any of your masterclass or podcast on social media, paid ads?
No,
Nada.
I think we did a little bit. I should say that going into 2022, my goal is to take off just about everything, Chris. I'm going to do nothing but interviews. So it'll be interviews that I record 1 day a week, maybe even 3 or 2 days a month.
Okay.
And that's it. And I don't know what else I'm going to do, but that's one of the things that I'm trying to figure out with my therapist. I'm rejecting ads. Um, so Andrew Gazdecki from Microacquire just asked to advertise. I said I can't do it. I got Zoho that asked to advertise. They've got a new pipeline-based CRM. I said I can't. I'm backing out of every ad that I can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to find some other thing to do for a bit to enjoy and then come back. But I am finding that except for the interviews, I'm freaking burned out. And
Yeah.
I love doing the interviews. I'm gonna do that forever. I think. Who knows? Maybe maybe at some point I'll not want to do those, but I love them. And everything else, I just want to have some space. I
Yeah.
want to just figure out what the next fun thing will be for me to do.
Do you think you can keep Mixergy and podcasting up for another 10 years?
I think so. When you find the beauty about interviewing is it's it's so meaningful. It's like asking somebody who's smart, do you think you'll read a book every year for the rest of your life? Well, yeah. It's just like that. It's, do you think that you'll have a problem or a curiosity, Andrew, that you want to talk to the person who solved it better than anyone else in the world? Well, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think I will. Now, will those people still be as open as they are today? I don't know. It's possible that they won't be. I'll tell you, Chris, one of the interesting things that's happened to me is that one of my guests who's been on the cutting edge of crypto reached out to me to ask me to take his interview down, and he's so open that I said, this is weird that you're asking me to take your, why? You know, I don't take down interviews. Why? And then he said, don't you know that the world is going pseudonymous, and I'm going to go ahead of the pack by getting rid of all my stuff, and we're going to be all pseudonymous online.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about the value of that and how things are going in that direction. And I'm going to tell him, no, I can't take his interview offline. But the fact that someone who's that open wants to go that closed is an indication of the future, right? And
Yeah.
so it's possible, Chris, that 10 years from now, nobody will want to do an interview. I don't believe that's true, but it's possible. And in that world, I think I'm going to have a real hard time. To date, we're incredibly lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Randolph, the founders of Airbnb, the founders of all these companies are doing freaking interviews. And often they'll do them with smaller people whose work they value because they need help getting their ideas expressed well, um, not because they even need the audience, the reach. We might as well jump in it while we can.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, well, we're gonna open up the questions to some of the audience members. So if you guys want to hop in and ask Andrew a question, we can. Dave wants me to ask a couple questions for him. So the first one that comes up comes from Dave Williams, founder of Nomad X, good friend. Dave says, I'm curious of your take on using a therapist versus a business coach, as I am seeing business coaches becoming more and more important for remote workers. And so Dave lives in Portugal, runs a remote community, and hangs out and runs a community of digital nomads, location independent entrepreneurs, remote workers.
I've never had a great result with therapists. I'm doing it again. I see my wife does, so I'm going to do it again and try it again. But I've never had a good relationship or never had anything meaningful come out of it unless I'm working on a specific issue and I need to have somebody help me get to that.
Hmm.
Um, I've also never had good relationships with business coaches, but actually I don't think I've had a lot of business coaches. Where I find that I thrive is here's a problem I have. Who can I get to just work with me on that one thing? And there's an upside and downside to that. The upside is you're focused on one thing, you'll eventually figure that thing out with someone. The downside is that you don't realize what you don't know you need. You don't realize all those outer edge issues that relate to the thing that you're working on. So it's probably healthy to have both.
Hmm.
I just personally have thrived more with one need and searching for people who can do that. And then the other thing that I strive more because my brain thinks in systems is I don't just want to have a conversation where you solve today's problem. That's helpful. But can you give me a framework? What are we taking away from this that I can use next time? That I can use to justify the direction you've given me. So I don't want to just know the Karakan opening in chess. I want to know why that Karakan works, and then tell me why you're teaching it to me at this level. And now I understand why I could do it better, and
Hmm.
then come back to you and tell you if my numbers are going up or down in chess for having done that, and we could adjust it. So that specific is really important.
One of the quotes that you have in your book, Andrew, that I really liked, was that anytime there's friction, you seek to create a system to smooth
Yeah.
out that or eliminate that friction. And I really appreciate that because I think I don't do that enough, and I would like to do that more often in my life and actually become better at that. But is there ever points where it's like your passion for creating the systems for around all the things that give us friction that it gets too much, becomes too much?
No, the problem with it is that you can eventually become so systemized that you don't break free. You've made the perfect system. I think somebody else, it might have been Dave or Adam in the chat, who
Mm-hmm.
said, "What's your feeling about remote work?" And I have a
Yes.
love-hate relationship, and it relates back to this.
Mm-hmm.
I loved my office. Most people hated leaving for the office. I didn't like anyone else being in my office, but I needed my office space to just be mine. And one of the reasons was that I could just sit at my desk and work. And then if I had an interview, I just hit one button. The lights, which are placed out of the way, but also placed in a way that makes it work well for me, would just come right on. And then I'd have a monitor that I could look at properly and see my notes while I'm talking to you. Another one on the side. I'd have an iPad or some device on in front of me with my notes. Everything was perfectly systemized. But it got so comfortable that and so good that I didn't experiment beyond that, and I didn't realize what else was out there. And so what I liked about COVID shutting down my office and then coming to Austin where I wasn't in an office space was I was forced to rethink it. One of the best discoveries, I just posted it on my Instagram story today. One of my best discoveries is I could actually record a podcast outside. That is amazing. You
In
think that you
Austin,
have
yeah.
to be inside. Austin is beautiful. I could
Yeah.
sit by the frickin' lake at a picnic table, have a cup of coffee, breathe the air, see the ducks, see the people, feel out in nature, but at the same time record a podcast. And I keep challenging my audience, can you hear anything in the background? I'll sometimes ask people to stomp their feet or to make noise so that I could see if the mic picks it up. If I use CRISPR, I think is the name of the app, or CRISP, I forget. If I
Mm-hmm.
use a mic where I could lower the pickup and then adjust it later, if I use a few things like that, no one can hear it and I get the freedom of motion.
Yeah.
And that is beautiful. And now, is the system great? No, I'm putting a boom arm on a picnic bench outside. I'm wiring in for a laptop and all that. All this stuff is not great, and I'm going to systemize it. My challenge will then be once it's systemized to a good point, to not just be comfortable with it and settle in, but to say, okay, now let's throw it out the window and try something brand new. And
Yeah.
I find that people work both ways. That people are either super creative and they can't have any systems at all, or they're super systemized and they get rid of all creativity. And the combination is, I think, more exciting.
Which part of Austin are you in?
So we've been going from Airbnb to Airbnb. I think we're in like
Okay.
Clarkville or something. It's close enough to downtown and right by Deep Eddy, the pool. Where are you?
Just south Travis Heights. Are you familiar with it? Like 35 in Riverside, pretty
Okay,
much.
now I'm just learning about the area.
Yeah, just south of downtown. So, okay. So Adam has a question. Adam, you want to hop in and ask your question?
More than anything else right now, I totally want to ask my question.
Okay.
Do it.
Andrew, I really resonated with the comments you made about burnout. And so I work with a bunch of entrepreneurs, investing in them, working with them. And the number one thing that I struggle with is supporting them in their own journey with burnout. And so I'm just curious if you have some wisdom to sprinkle across our brains about how do you approach burnout? And yeah, anything you can riff on that would be really, really useful.
So that is what I had a conversation with my therapist about. And I said, I like my cycle of excessive work and then burnout. I just love being fully engaged and then fully disconnected. And what he helped me realize was that I often just like the drop the mic moment. So people have said, Andrew, why did you just sell your company and just move on? I said that was the thing I needed. I just wanted I my big agreement wasn't that I needed to maximize my price, but I needed to maximize my exit. Within 30 days, I wanted to have no part in the business. I'm walking away, goodbye, because I was that burned out last time. And I like doing that, and I have a history of doing that. I am finding now that I can't, and that's different. That I can't just say mic drop goodbye because there are people who count on me. Um, there's things that are just going to continue that will not continue without me. Our greeting card company continued without me ever being there. Nobody knew or cared that I wasn't there. The mixergy business, the other parts of my world would not work as well, and so I'm trying to figure out how to deal with that. The only thing that I could say, having gone through it, is that I don't think we recognize burnout or depression or those feelings until it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
It's like recognizing that you could get hurt after you get a car crash, instead of before. It's just our heads are not there, and if I would have known that it was coming up, I think I could have handled it better. But to wait till it's too late is problematic.
Anything else, Adam?
That was great. What I heard is that at some point in your life, burnout was a healthy tool that you used to end whatever you were working on. And you have now moved into a different kind of system where burnout is not the appropriate tool. And so maybe what I need to be aware of when I'm helping these folks is, where is burnout for them? Is that a thing that's a healthy response to let them know it's time to move on? Or is it something that, if left unaddressed, is actually going to be toxic inside of the systems they're building? Am I tracking what you said?
Yeah, and I think also that a lot of the people you're talking to may not even be aware that they're capable of being burned out because
Touche. Yeah.
it just goes so much, so hard, and I love and feed off of that. Um, and so that's where you just don't have that recognition.
Have you ever had a brain scan, Andrew?
No, should I? What would I scan
Yes.
for?
Because you can. So I was experiencing burnout, and I'm a neuroscience nut, so I like studying this stuff, right? And so I went in and I got a brain scan, and you can literally see burnout happening in a brain scan. And I actually decided to buy the machine that was scanning my brain so I could scan it
Wow.
regularly and
Okay.
re-optimize it. And one of the things I do with entrepreneurs in our community and friends that I know, like I'll scan their brains to help them make sure they're optimizing their brain. So since you're in Austin, actually, I'll just if you want to come over and get a brain scan one day,
I'm down.
I'll do it for free.
What's it gonna tell me though?
It'll tell you. So it can do a lot of things. It'll show the voltage in your brain reaction voltage, brain reaction time, physical reaction time. It measures your HRV. It will measure your alpha, beta, theta, and delta waves in the coherence of your brain communicating to itself. It'll predict Alzheimer's and dementia years in advance. And what we do is we send a scan off to a neurologist, and we have him read it, and you get a good thorough video review, and it comes back and tells you, okay, this supplement may help you, this thing will help you, sort of thing. So if you'd like to come over, you're more than welcome, and we can set up a brain scan for you.
Down. I think we're taking some time away from seeing people because we got COVID
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah. When
family, in the
post COVID,
house.
let's do it at the new year.
Post
Like after,
COVID,
yeah,
yeah.
let's do it then. Yeah. Okay, so Kian's got some questions. You know Kian from Monetize More, Kian Graham. He's coming in, and he was on.
Hey, I get to see Kian. Hey man,
Hey,
good to see you again.
yeah, good to see you, Andrew. Cool. So, yeah, great to talk to you as well. So, I had a couple questions, but first one, I wanted to touch on the advertisements. Because one thing that I really appreciate as a guest and as a listener is how, like you said, your advertisements are conversational and they're very kind of customized. They're not intrusive. I find that very unique. I don't see that in other podcasts. So, it's really great. There's a lot of value to the advertisers and to the listeners. What I kind of wanted to know is, was it always like that, or was there one point where you're like, oh, maybe I should experiment? What's the story around how it became that way?
I used to be so bad at doing ads for the guests, like I told Chris, that I would spend literally hours just trying to record one little thing. And then I started fantasizing about going into, because I love talking to strangers, I love talking to people. I started fantasizing about, can I just take my microphone and go over to, there's this restaurant, Swingers in LA, right in Santa Monica near where I live. Can I just go in there, talk to a stranger and say, I can't do this podcast ad. Can we just hang out and talk about this thing? And I'll tell you what the sponsor does. And if you don't understand, you tell me, and then I could clarify it. So I'm not just talking to myself. And I just, for some reason, just didn't have the guts to do it, didn't have the hardware and equipment at the time to do it. And so I didn't do it. And I just kept forcing myself to record those ads ahead of time until I finally got good at it, but I never liked it. It never worked well for me. I don't know when, but at some point I said, let's just do it with my guest. And I know where the influence is. I used to love listening to talk radio. If you listen to old Howard Stern ads, he would interact with his team about the ad, with the guest about the ad. It was just so interesting to hear the ads that he read when he would. And by the way, there are people online now that can get you the older. I paid someone to go and hunt down years and years of old Howard Stern episodes. They're so good because you could see the guy fully developing his personality over the years and experimenting and getting to the person that he was. One of the things that made him so interesting was his ads that were pre-recorded by him or by other people were just blah, and you'd want to wait for them to move so you can get to the thing. The ones that he would talk about were great. Like he used to do this one ad for a bartender school, and he just started talking about how the bartender is the one that everyone is interested in the bar, and no one wants to talk to you when you go into a bar, right? And he's talking to his team, and they're laughing and talking about the bartender who everyone was paying attention to instead of them. And goes, well, if you want to be that bartender, just go take a class. There's a class that you could do. And it was just so funny. You talk about how he used to be a dork and that he needs these techniques to have women be interested in him. And the whole thing was just part of the show. And though that was influential, Rush Limbaugh talking to his audience and saying, look, the liberals are out to get now the orange business because the orange industry is sponsoring my show. Look, people, the best thing you could do is just go buy as much orange juice as you can. That's the only way to show the libs that you will not back down. I interviewed the guy who sold Uggs boots. He was selling them to basically men and women in their 20s and teens who just were super stylish. And he talked about, I said, you used to advertise on Rush Limbaugh. He said, yeah, let me give you a story about why. I said, tell me. Because this one woman, older lady, goes in and buys, I think it was a dozen Uggs boots. And the salesperson says, you don't look like our typical customer. What are you doing? She said, oh, Rush Limbaugh told me that I should be buying these Uggs boots. And so I'm going to buy as many as I can for the whole family. And so she bought all the Uggs boots. And the way that she did it is because he added his personality. He made the boots about more than boots, about himself and his worldview. Howard Stern made bartending school more than about bartending. Nobody does it. Now, the thing that I'm having a problem with as a podcast listener, I'm obsessive with podcasts, I listen to them all the time, is freaking people are getting too corporate. If you listen to the Verge podcast, they have pre-recorded ads. It's not them recording it. They will literally say 5G is overpromised, overhyped. Now let's go into commercial. And then they'll have a commercial. I swear this was true. Of Verizon saying the 5G can help cure cancer. I swear to God, it was the implication that they had. So they're out of alignment with it. Who's going to listen to this when clearly they told you that the 5G stuff is bull? And now you've got the advertiser saying the opposite. What's the point? You know who's doing it well is YouTubers. Sorry, I'm going on a rant here because this is important. I think that if you're going to do this, I think the bigger upside is in being a personality. YouTubers who will get a commercial for, I don't know what, story blocks where you can go and buy pictures and videos that you can include in your video. And if they're reviewing a camera, they're going to say, you know what, the DJI Osmo Action 2 is coming out. It has good mics, but let's hear how good the mics are. I'm actually going to do, and let's see how good the camera is. I'm going to do this whole commercial for story blocks using their microphone and their camera. You're going to see me in windy situations, and you're going to see me in other situations, sunny, bright, dark, etc. And you'll see how it works while listening to, now I'm watching story blocks commercial for the millionth freaking time because I want to see, does the microphone really work in these conditions? It's such a rant, but I think it's important.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's all about the context, and I think you execute it really well. It's that convergence of like advertisement and product placement, and it's yeah, and you manage the context really well. So I really enjoy that, and as a listener, I don't feel like I should just like skip it. It actually adds value to the whole story of the podcast. So really like that. I have one other question. For Andrew, you interviewed some incredible entrepreneurs. Some of them are founders of unicorn companies, but like entrepreneurs of all different company sizes and successes. What would you say is the biggest personality trait that separates those, say, unicorn founders from the rest?
Let me not go to unicorn, but just go to the ones who are doing especially well.
Mm-hmm.
They really are what you think they are, and how they project themselves to this, like, you think that it's just super authentic, and they found a way to do that. And it seems easy to do, but it's really hard. Just to, how do you know yourself well enough that you can communicate yourself in general in life is really hard. How do you know yourself that you can communicate yourself to the person you're in love with is really tough. And then to communicate yourself to the people you work with is hard. And then to communicate yourself and be yourself through your company, that's really tough. But the ones that I've seen are just, they do that. And as freaky as they are, they communicate that freakiness and they don't hold back. And it's just amazing to watch and to do. I mean, like one of the founders of Reddit, we were having dinner in this super open conversation. You could see he is who he is online. He's not, everything is like a projection of this thing that is him. It's the embodiment of him. I see that a lot.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks for that. It sounds like authenticity is a really big thing that kind of separates those.
And it's so freaking hard. It's so hard. It's right. Like, can I be myself with Chris and admit to him that I went to sex class so that I can learn how to be better at sex, that I sucked? Like, that's kind of like, who's listening? Is this what he's looking for? Right? It's just all that stuff. Is that not going to hang on me that I've just said that I'm burned out? And then what is it? Like, all that stuff is just really hard. And these are little easier steps. So I don't want to underestimate it, but they really are amazingly themselves.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Thank you, Andrew. And great chatting with you again.
Same here.
We appreciate your transparency, Andrew. I always think it's great when guests open up and share like intimate things about themselves, because it really does help other people realize that we're all going through a bunch of shit together. Sometimes not always the exact same thing, but we're always going through a bunch of shit.
And you know what? I'll go a little bit further. It's not just even, it's everything. So Syed Balki, incredibly successful founder of WP Beginner, this blog about WordPress. WP is WordPress, right? He started creating all these plugins. The dude's making bank from all these plugins that people are buying. It's just, running the company is going well. He'll tell you, everyone's talking about how they just bought a new car. He goes, you see that building over there with the bank in it? I bought that, right? Everything about him is his own freaky self. He is super systemized. Everything is documented. Everything in the company has got his anal retentive approach. We literally sat down for lunch. He literally, without noticing, saw a freaking penny and picked the freaking penny up because he cares about pennies like that. I he'll talk about how, with the same enthusiasm that he has about buying a building, about how his gardener let him use his Netflix account as a second user because he doesn't want to pay for freaking Netflix. His business is run that way. He is run that way. He is full on in alignment of who he is.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
All transparency, I love your red advertisements. And the first time I heard it, you did it so well. I was like, I've got to do that. I think this is 2, 3 years ago, and I've been doing that ever since because you did it so well. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Dave has another question here. Who are some of your favorite startup entrepreneurs and podcasts?
Uh, Favorite entrepreneurs is a guy that I've really been digging lately that I don't think people are paying attention to. His name is Nick O'Neill. What he's
Mm-hmm.
doing is either going to be stupid or it's going to be great. And I think he's in the NFT space. He created the Nifty, and it's right now just kind of ranking NFTs, but he's kind of put himself at the heart of the NFT space, and he did it at a time when people thought the whole thing was ridiculous. And when I was trying to buy my first NFT, he got on Zoom with me and walked me through it and acknowledged the problems with NFTs, but was also optimistic about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that whole space is really interesting. He's one. And then as far as podcasts, I think the Acquired podcast is one that a lot of people in Silicon Valley are listening to, and it's still worth listening to. If you're into biographies or books, they kind of do that, like tell the story of a thing or a business, but two people talking, it makes such a difference. You can listen to an audiobook and it sounds flat, but if you listen to the two of them telling you the story of how Ethereum was founded and grew, how Bitcoin was founded and grew, or how Standard Oil was founded and grew, it's much more alive and interesting to hear the two of them do it. And they built a real following in that space, and it's well earned.
Yeah. Um, I think we're going to wrap up here soon. Just check with the audience, see if there's any more questions out there. But while we wait for that, Andrew, maybe I'm always curious. I like to ask successful podcasters this: any other ways to grow a podcast in today's market other than just creating really high valuable content that you recommend?
It seems to me that podcasting is just insanely hard to grow directly. You talked about Tim Ferriss. My understanding from people who work with him is that he's not growing the podcast directly as much
Right.
as he is growing that list, the email list, which then feeds into the podcast. You see that the people who are now at the top of the charts on podcast apps often have their start with YouTube or YouTube clips, right? And so that feeds in. There's just crappy discovery right now in podcasts. I think Spotify is doing a good job of introducing new podcasts, but if I look into podcasts that Spotify is recommending, they've been such duds that you start to appreciate how amazing the algorithm is on TikTok or even YouTube, that they will on those platforms find other creators that are phenomenal that match my interests. I still haven't found that in Spotify. I haven't found that on any other apps. It's still a challenge, and so it's better to build them on different platforms and then bring it into podcasting.
That's a good recommendation. I agree with that completely, actually. Are there any ways, Andrew, that we could support you, like the listeners out there? Buy the book. I think that's a great one to start. Listen to the podcast. Any projects you're working on or people you're looking to get connected with that we can keep our ears open for you?
I'll say here's an amazing thing that I'm going to learn. Jason Gaynard from Mastermind Talks, he's so aware of the people and their needs before they're even aware of him. He's amazing that way. And once I published my book, the first thing that I got back from anyone outside of my direct immediate circle was from him saying, "Andrew, I put a comment, a positive review on Amazon." That was such a nice, thoughtful thing that I have to now remember when any of my friends write a book, even if I'm not the first, to go in and
Mm-hmm.
do that. It's like when you watch your friend come off stage at a conference and they think that they're not sure how they did, to say that was amazing. I love that thing that you did. So helpful. When I finish doing an interview with someone and at the end they say they want to know how was it, and authors like that too. And so to be able to say to a creator of any type, I loved it and I even wrote a review somewhere. Ooh, that is so powerful. And so I'm stealing that. I don't have anything that I need from anyone in the audience, but I'm so stealing that Jason Gaynard idea and being aware of it. And now I think like such an idiot that Muriel, my buddy, wrote a book about called Indistractable, the one about how to stay focused.
Yeah.
I should have been the first one. We were talking as he was doing it. I should have been the first one to go on Amazon and write a review and send it over to him. I should have been the first one after reading his book Hook to go on and do it. Even before reading it, I should have just gone on and said, I've watched this guy develop these ideas. I'm excited to read the book. I bought the book, like all that stuff. Anyway, those little things, I like watching things on the inside so that I understand how to treat other people who are going through it. And so now that I've published a book, I'm now noticing that, and I'm going to keep that in my back pocket.
Yeah. So you guys, let's go leave a review for Andrew and his new book, Stop Asking Questions. Actually, it's really hard to get reviews on podcast as well. I know, I imagine you've had that experience as well. So any listeners out there feeling generous, want to do your good deed for the day, go give Andrew a review on his podcast as well.
And if you do it for someone else or to me, to just send a message saying I did that.
Yeah.
So my wife didn't do it, and then I think her mom didn't do it, and I asked her to do it, and she said, "Oh, wait a minute, I was thinking I have to finish reading the book before I do it." Of course she did, right? Like, we're getting so freaking anal about it that and then she went and she did it and it was phenomenal. That we overthink it. You wait for someone to listen to a full podcast episode before reviewing it. It's like Apple Podcast app is going to go, this sucks. He person clearly didn't listen to every single episode, where it's just enough to say, I've watched this person authentically build a business and now he's done it. I should have done that freaking Mark Randolph. He just came up with a podcast. I should say, I've watched him help a friend of mine over the years in private. I'm glad that now he's doing a podcast where you get to listen to how he helps other entrepreneurs. You freaking love that. Everyone who's creating has this sense of, am I doing good? Do people like it? And to be able to say, not just pat you on the back privately, but in public, phenomenal. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, my friend, we're going to wrap up there. For the listeners, where's the best place they can find you at?
Mixergy in your podcast app, or just look for Andrew Warner in there.
Any other tips or droplets of wisdom you want to leave us with before we go?
This whole book came because I obsessively started to write and document the things that I do well. I think we should be documenting so much more in our lives, even if it's in our journal, that when Jeremy Carrican, the producer of Inside the Actor Studio, told me a technique for doing a better job of getting somebody to open up, the fact that I would write it in a Google Doc is tremendous. And now as I say that, I'm going to take that advice with my therapist, that every time I learn something insightful about myself, I'm just going to write it down as like a system for operating Andrew. And I think a system for operating how you do your podcast, how you do everything that you think is just so insignificant, is so helpful to have it documented and to have it processed. And who knows, maybe at some point it could be a book, or maybe it's just a way of making you better in today.
You can call those SOAs, System of Operating, for Andrew. All right, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
The word I would use, we're all using SOPs like we're now Dilbert characters. I think the word we should be using is playbook. That is our playbook. And then we'll feel better about using it. Our team will feel better about using it. What's the playbook for getting this thing done?
I like that.
Develop your own playbook for life, for work, for everything.
Yes, for podcasting and all. Yeah, Andrew, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all your tips and tricks and wisdom with us. And I think the guests really enjoyed you as well. We're going to wrap up there. Thank you so much, Andrew. And we hope to have you on the show soon again sometime. But keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. I see you in the chat. Appreciate it.